I want to start with a scene I've watched play out more times than I can count. Someone sits across from me in a longevity clinic holding a neat stack of lab reports, paper-clipped, highlighted, the kind of folder that says, "I did everything right." They've been seeing their primary care doctor for years. Every year they do the same routine blood work, and every year they get the same message. "Looks great, see you next year." But the person in front of me doesn't feel great. They're more tired than they used to be. Their workouts feel harder, their blood pressure is creeping up, or they have a family history of heart disease and they can't shake the feeling that something is happening quietly underneath the surface. And here's the problem. The most common lab panels are designed to catch disease when it's already loud. Longevity medicine is about catching it when it's still whispering. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through 5 critical blood tests that can reveal early, preventable risk long before most people develop symptoms and long before routine labs officially flag something as abnormal. These are not always included in standard yearly blood work, and even when they are, they're often not interpreted with a long-term prevention lens. I also want you to understand something important right now. Getting the test is only the beginning. The real power is in how you interpret it, how you look at trends over time, and how you connect the result to your specific risk factors, your family history, your lifestyle, your sleep, your stress, and your current health goals. And just as a quick disclaimer, this is educational content, not medical advice. I'm a physician, but I'm not your physician. Please talk to your doctor before changing anything about your health regimen, especially if you're taking medications, managing chronic conditions, or recovering from an injury or illness. Now, the first test is one of the most important predictors of early cardiovascular events that most people have never even heard of. And it's especially relevant when you hear about someone who looks perfectly healthy having a heart attack out of nowhere. The test is lipoprotein A, also called LPA. Think of LPA as a cholesterol-carrying particle that behaves like LDL, but with extra danger attached. It doesn't just contribute to plaque buildup, it also increases the likelihood that plaques become unstable, rupture, and trigger clots. It can also play a role in inflammation and calcification, including calcification of the aortic valve over time, which can lead to serious heart issues later in life. What makes LPA uniquely important is that for most people, it's largely genetic. It's not something you created because you ate the wrong thing last month. It's not something that reliably improves just because you started walking more. It's closer to a built-in risk setting, and because genes don't change, you often only need to measure it once in your lifetime. If it's high, you don't panic, but you do get smart and proactive because it tells you something very valuable. You may need to be more aggressive about the things you can control, and this matters even more if you have a family history of premature heart disease, meaning heart disease in male relatives before 55 or female relatives before 65. If LPA comes back elevated, the current reality is that diet and exercise tend to have minimal or inconsistent effects on the number itself. There are promising therapies being developed, but in many places they're not yet widely available or approved for routine use. So what do you do right now? You treat LPA like a warning flare. It doesn't mean you're doomed. It means you should tighten the entire cardiovascular risk environment around you. Blood pressure, insulin resistance, inflammation, smoking exposure, sleep quality, and, very importantly, your atherogenic particle burden, which brings us to the second test. The second test is apolipoprotein B, also called ApoB. Most standard lipid panels include LDL cholesterol, LDL-C, and it's useful, but it doesn't tell the full story because it measures how much cholesterol is being carried, not how many cholesterol-carrying particles are actually circulating. A simple way to understand this is LDL-C tells you how much cargo is on the highway. ApoB tells you how many trucks are on the highway. And when it comes to plaque formation, the truck count matters because every atherogenic particle has the potential to enter the artery wall and contribute to buildup. ApoB effectively counts the particles that can cause atherosclerosis, not just LDL, but also other cholesterol-carrying particles like VLDL remnants and intermediate density particles that can still drive risk. This becomes especially important in people with insulin resistance, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver tendencies, metabolic syndrome, higher triglycerides, because in those settings you can have LDL-C that looks okay while particle number is still high. And if you're playing the long game, you're not trying to win the My Labs Look Fine this year trophy. hypertrophy. You're trying to reduce the odds of a heart attack or stroke over the next 20, 30, 40 years. That's why ApoB can be such a powerful number. It helps you see risk more clearly when the usual cholesterol panel is giving you a partial picture. It also helps guide strategy. Sometimes lifestyle is enough, sometimes it's not, and sometimes the difference between fine and excellent for prevention matters. This is where you'll often notice a disconnect between standard practice and longevity-focused practice. Traditional risk calculators often focus on 10-year risk, but plaque doesn't operate on a 10-year calendar. Plaque starts forming far earlier than most people realize, and by the time a short-term calculator starts flashing red, a lot of the groundwork may already be laid down. Prevention works best when you intervene before the system is in crisis mode. Now let's talk about a test that sounds like a chemistry word, but it can tell you a lot about your cardiovascular and cognitive risk trajectory, and it also gives clues about nutrient status. The third test is homocysteine. Homocysteine is an amino acid byproduct, meaning it's normal to have some, just like it's normal for a factory to produce some exhaust. The issue is when homocysteine accumulates and stays elevated. I like to describe it as metabolic smoke. A little smoke is expected, but if the ventilation system isn't functioning properly, smoke builds up and starts irritating everything around it. Elevated homocysteine has been associated with increased risk of cardiovascular events and has also been studied in the context of cognitive decline and dementia risk patterns. One of the most common reasons homocysteine rises is insufficient functioning of pathways that recycle it, and those pathways depend heavily on B vitamins, especially B12, folate B9, and B6. Homocysteine isn't a moral failing, it's a signal. It might be telling you about dietary intake, absorption problems, medication effects, gut issues, genetic variations in methylation pathways, thyroid function, kidney function, or a combination of factors. You may have heard of MTHFR, a genetic variant that can influence folate metabolism and homocysteine handling in some people. The key is nuance. Not everyone with an MTHFR variant has high homocysteine, and not every elevated homocysteine is solved by randomly buying supplements. The right approach is usually to measure, interpret in context, and then work with a clinician to figure out what's driving it and what's appropriate for you. For many people, optimizing B vitamin status and addressing underlying issues can improve the number, but the goal isn't just to chase a lab. The goal is to reduce a long-term risk signal and strengthen metabolic resilience. The fourth test is one most people never hear about until it becomes painfully obvious: uric acid. Most people associate uric acid with gout, the classic swollen toe that suddenly makes someone take diet seriously overnight. But uric acid isn't only about gout, it can also act as an early marker of metabolic stress. Elevated uric acid levels are often seen alongside insulin resistance, hypertension, fatty liver risk patterns, and increased cardiometabolic risk. And here's an important nuance: many lab reports will list normal uric acid ranges that are built around gout thresholds, not metabolic optimization. So a number can come back normal, but in a prevention context, the trend might still matter. If your uric acid is drifting upward year over year, especially alongside rising blood pressure, rising waist circumference, or worsening triglycerides, it may be one of the earlier signs that your metabolism is getting less flexible. Another nuance is that uric acid can fluctuate. Hard exercise, dehydration, and certain dietary patterns can temporarily bump it. That's why one snapshot isn't the whole story. Trends and context matter. Uric acid is useful because it gives you another angle, another data point, to detect early metabolic strain before you end up with full-blown type 2 diabetes or significant hypertension. It's not about fear, it's about catching drift early, when small changes still have big power. Now, the fifth test is one that can completely change how you interpret kidney function, because routine labs can be misleading depending on the person. The test is Cystatin C. Most standard labs estimate kidney filtration using creatinine, and creatinine is useful, but it has a huge limitation. It depends on muscle mass and hydration status. If you're very muscular, creatinine can look higher and make kidney function appear worse than it is. If you're older, lean, or losing muscle, creatinine can look perfect even while kidney filtration is quietly declining. Cystatin C is produced by cells throughout the body and filtered by the kidneys at a steady rate, making it a more reliable reflection of filtration in many scenarios. It's not influenced by muscle mass the way creatinine is. test. This matters because kidney health connects to everything: cardiovascular risk, medication safety, blood pressure regulation, and long-term resilience. In many cases, using Cystatin C alongside creatinine provides a clearer picture than relying on creatinine alone. Again, it's not about collecting tests like trophies. It's about accuracy. If you're trying to play the long game, you want the most truthful picture of what's happening in the background. Now, I promised you a lab test you probably already get every year, and it's often misunderstood. This one shows up on routine metabolic panels, and people get told it's normal all the time, while it may already be signaling trouble. I'm talking about liver enzymes, especially ALT. Many labs flag ALT as normal up to around 40 units per liter. But what counts as normal has drifted upward over time because the average population has become less metabolically healthy. And one of the biggest reasons ALT rises quietly is fatty liver disease, which is often undiagnosed for years. Fatty liver isn't just a liver problem. It's closely tied to insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction, and if it progresses, it can become devastating. Here's what matters: if your ALT is creeping up over time, even if it's still within normal range, that trend may deserve attention. It doesn't mean panic, it means curiosity. It means zooming out and asking, what are my triglycerides doing? What's happening to my waistline? How's my sleep? How much alcohol am I drinking? Am I building muscle or losing it? Am I moving daily? Am I eating in a way that keeps my blood sugar stable? Or am I living on stress, snacks, and caffeine? ALT is one of those labs where technically normal can still be a whisper. And if you learn to listen to whispers, you often prevent screams. So if you're watching this and thinking, okay, but what do I do with this? Here's the mindset shift. The goal isn't to become an amateur doctor. The goal is to become your own advocate. If your primary care doctor doesn't order these tests routinely, it's often not because they're useless, but because the healthcare system is built around time constraints and short-term risk management. Preventive longevity care takes more nuance, and not every clinician has the time or training to interpret these markers the way a prevention-focused practice does. That's not an insult, it's just the reality of how medicine is structured. The win for you is knowing what to ask for, understanding what the test is actually measuring, and then discussing the result intelligently with your clinician. And above all, you want to track trends. One lab result is a photo. Trends are a movie. If you want to protect your future, you don't just want a single normal snapshot. You want a long-term storyline that shows stability, improvement, and early course correction. If you want the simplest takeaway, here it is. Routine labs are great for catching obvious problems, but they're not always built to detect early preventable disease. LPA can reveal hidden genetic cardiovascular risk. ApoB can reveal the true burden of atherogenic particles even when LDL-C looks fine. Homocysteine can signal metabolic strain and B vitamin pathway issues that matter for long-term risk. Uric acid can act like an early metabolic warning light well before diabetes shows up on standard panels. Cystatin C can reveal kidney filtration issues that creatinine can miss, especially in people with lower muscle mass. And ALT, your routine liver enzyme, can be quietly elevated in a way that points toward fatty liver and insulin resistance long before most people realize anything is wrong. You don't need to run every test tomorrow, but if you've been told everything is fine while your body is telling you something feels off, or if you have family history risk, or if you want to play the long game with your health, these labs can offer clarity, and clarity is power, because the earlier you detect risk, the easier it is to change the trajectory. If you want, tell me your age range and your main goal: heart health, energy, metabolic health, longevity, family history, and I can suggest which of these tests would be the highest priority to discuss with your doctor first.